Hi everyone, welcome back from the break. So this section we're gonna talk about HMOs or houses with multiple occupancy. So Andrew, do you want to kick off because you raised this issue at the council? What is a house with multiple occupancy, or why is it such an issue in Tower Hamlets now?
So first of all, a sort of a house of multiple occupation is basically an existing home which has been converted into a sort of, I guess, boarding house. I mean, it's another term for it, where lots of adults basically live in that house. Either kind of it's converted into like smaller bed sits, or they share. And there's some sort of technical rules about how you define a house of multiple occupation. They're called HMOs for short, so I'll use the term HMOs because house of multiple occupation is a bit of a mouthful. But if I explain what the problem is and why it's been a particular problem in my local area, and then why we raised this at the council meeting. So the problem that we have is that we have a bunch of family-sized homes that were built in the 1980s in sort of island gardens. You know, they're perfect family homes. You know, they're sort of 3-bedroom, mostly some 4-bedroom. With small gardens out the back. And Island Gardens has always been quite a sort of family-friendly destination because of the access to parks and all of the rest of it. But an individual, he and his brother have been buying up these family homes, normally paying sort of cash or with mortgages. And what he does is he then converts them into rental properties, and then eventually in time converts them into homes of multiple occupation. And we think he owns somewhere between 100 and 150 homes within about a 10-minute walk of each other in the southern part of the Isle of Dogs. And, you know, basically he submits a planning application basically every 3 or 4 weeks. And what he basically does is he kind of takes the house and then he sort of adds something here, and then he adds something here, and he adds something here, and he adds something here. So by the end of that process, it's a much bigger property. And basically you can have 6-7 adults living in it. So the issues that causes are, you know, so the pressures on the transport network. So you go from a home designed for, you know, 2 adults and 2 children to a home with, you know, maybe 6, 7, 8 adults in it. So a lot more pressure on transport, a lot more pressure on the water network. So we have particular problems with water pressure on the Isle of Dogs because they're all having showers in the morning. Issues financially for the council because we only get one payment of council tax regardless of how many people live in the property. So again, we're having to support more people but with less money. Issues about affordable housing because these homes are being converted, but because they're done one by one, we don't get our 35% share of affordable housing. We don't get any Section 106 money. We don't get any SIL money. And then there are sort of wider issues about whether these are good homes for people. So I know the London Renters Union have got involved with some of these properties and made some allegations, which you can find on Twitter, and other sort of issues and antisocial behaviour. But the underlying problem is that, you know, there is a demand for these properties. So these properties are typically occupied by students, or sometimes they're occupied by people who are, you know, their first job in London. So they're kind of looking for a first home and they can't afford to rent an apartment, but they can afford to rent a room. Or it may be sort of people who've come from overseas and again can't afford to buy something, so they're renting something in the short term. So there is definitely a demand for these properties. And one of the reasons why I do support the building of purpose-built student housing is I'd rather students live in purpose-built accommodation, which is properly controlled and regulated, where we get the correct amount of money, rather than converting family-sized homes. Because then the other part of this problem is that you're then losing children. There's no place for families to live. So what you therefore have is, you know, young families, they can't afford to move up into a family-sized home. So what do? They leave the area. And therefore it changes the demographic mix again, which we were talking about earlier. And it's again, another reason why we have such a young population is because families, you know, yes, obviously some, you know, have got family links. So some people do try and stay here, but many people would love to stay here, but just can't afford to do it. There aren't the homes, so therefore they leave, which therefore results eventually in having to close schools. And we haven't had to do that in the Isle of Dogs. We've got other growth, but that's the other consequence of this is less children because there's less family-sized homes. So there's a bunch of negative consequences. We need to meet that demand, I think, with more purpose-built accommodation. And kind of one of the things that was disappointing about the last council meeting was not trying to find a balance between, yes, there is legitimate demand for these cheaper properties, and we're not trying to meet that demand through any means. So basically, a private individual is going to take advantage of the situation and sort of exploit it and provide all of these homes because nobody else is willing to do it.
It does have an impact. I know in my ward, we calculated that there's a demand for, say, an extra primary school, and a primary school was opened up near the tube station. And then the demand isn't there, and everybody's scratching their head trying to think, hang on a minute, all these new units have come. And what's happened is, lo and behold, is a lot of the leasehold flats have been turned into HMOs. So traditionally what would have happened is a family would have rented those flats because they're actually designed for families. And I've seen families who privately rented for a few years just to get on their feet, and either they're in temporary housing or they're privately renting, and then they use the local schools, etc. Instead of that, what's happened is they've been converted into HMOs. So instead of families moving in, you get young single individuals, and there's nothing wrong with young single individuals, but what it is it had an impact in the sense that demand for that school isn't there, and now we're kind of scratching our head locally to see whether that primary school is going to be sustainable. And you're seeing it on the west of the borough as well, where the council calculated that there's going to be certain demands for certain public services, and it hasn't come through. They just can't work out why it hasn't come through. But I think a lot of it might be explained by the high rents that could be achieved by landlords and leaseholders into turning into HMOs. I know there's specific houses in the Stepney area that all the rooms been converted into a bedsit with ensuite facilities, and that's a family that used to be a family area, but now it's full of young. So it is having an impact, and we need to think it through. Have you, in terms of solutions? I know Newham led the way in terms of tackling HMOs. They had a really tough licensing scheme, and I know that because I came across so many prosecutions that the council brought against landlords, and it's actually improved the housing situation. Just talking to residents knew, and we actually put the rents down, private rents down in the area, and it eased the pressure of public amenities by having this really hard and tough approach to HMOs and regulating them and licensing them. How come Tower Hamlets hasn't taken the Newham approach, Andrew?
So we have partially. So there are sort of restrictions in 3 wards in the borough. And part of the fault is with government as well. So yeah. Whenever I talk about this issue, people point out, yes, that the government haven't made this easy, and that's absolutely true as well. And they could do more to help with this area because it does particularly impact kind of inner city areas like ours. But that doesn't mean that you can't be more proactive. And the council motion that we introduced in January was very much lifting ideas and quoting from other Labour authorities where they have been kind of more proactive in this area. So there are things that you can do within existing rules and regulations if you choose to do so. And we've really struggled with this one individual or this one family. So, for example, I had a solicitor's letter last week from the solicitor on behalf of this person, sort of threatening me. So I don't mention his name. I never do it anyway. But he said he's quite a threatening person, not just with councillors, but with other people as well. And we've really struggled to get the council to engage with some of these issues and some of the problems that it causes. And we just don't feel that we get support on some of this stuff, and they don't seem sort of particularly interested. And eventually what happened in the council meeting is that the motion we presented, again, as I said, based on ideas from other Labour authorities, was kind of watered down to a point that was kind of pretty much pointless. And what really disappointed me was, I think we need to have this conversation about, we need to build the right type of accommodation for the right mix of people. So we need family accommodation, but we also need homes for people, who are currently renting in HMOs, and that's student housing. And there are other ideas out there as well. So in Cross Harbour, for example, there is a kind of a shared accommodation block that was built with 722 sort of units, and it's like you have like shared kitchens, but you have your own bedroom and bathroom, but you share communal areas, and that's not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than renting an apartment. And those are the kind of things that we should be encouraging, rather than just sort of seeing all of our family homes being converted into bedsits and HMOs, which are not, necessarily fantastic homes for people either.
Definitely, I think having this kind of sort of like hands-off approach to the private housing market doesn't work, because what the eventual outcome in all the case studies I've seen is that rents go up, because that's if you leave a landlord to their own device, that's their natural inclination, is to drive up rents, and they will that's what, and the costs will be passed on to everybody else, and that's why you need tighter regulation to sort of like keep rents down, and that's the impact from Newham that I've spoken to people, but also to make sure that landlords actually can't pass on the costs. It's costs like extra rubbish or pressures on public communities. Like some of the horror stories they came across in Newham was people using their sheds outside their houses in the gardens as renting them out, and literally they went in area by area, going into those outside areas, and people appreciated it. They go afterwards, they just realized that the area couldn't, there were so many people living in such a small area, it's like the streets couldn't take it, and they go, it just feels much better, it's cleaner, there's less pressure, but also the rents have come down as well, because unscrupulous landlords can't charge as high as they want by just renting out a shed in a bed. But I think this is an issue that's going to rumble on, and I think we need to come to some kind of solution to it. I know, and we need to have a much more better regulated private rented sector, but it's going to carry on, rumble on, and I look forward to any ideas or any proposals that Andrew's going to bring to council. We'll bring it to the show first, but we're going to go to a break now, and after the break we're going to talk about listeners' questions. So join us after the break, and then we will move on to questions posed by you. Hi everyone, welcome back to the final section of the Politics Show with myself, Councillor Premier, and Councillor Andrew Wood. So this is a section we're going to cover general questions that are posed by listeners to us. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. Andrew, do you want to kick off with what you want to cover in terms of frequently asked questions and what those answers are?
Yeah, so probably the most common question that I get, and I suspect most councillors get, are sort of related to housing issues and sort of housing associations in particular. So whether it's, water flooding or things breaking down, we kind of get lots of questions, obviously not just Tower Hamlets homes, but there's lots of other housing associations out there as well. And I kind of try and explain to people what the different steps are. So I thought it'd be worth kind of just summarizing what those steps are. And the first piece of advice I always give about anything to do with Tower Hamlets Council or these issues more generally is you can never rely on just kind of one route. You've always got to try multiple kind of avenues at the same time. So you've got to try different things. I think it's a technical term sometimes is a shotgun approach. You just kind of shoot a shotgun and see what lands. But some of the things that you can do is obviously contact your local councillor, somebody like myself or Councillor Peru Mir. You can find our contact details on the Tower Hamlets Council website. There's quite a good section there to sort of how you find them. So just find your local councillor, write to them. It may well be that they already are aware of the issue from somebody else, so they may be able to give you an immediate answer. But one of the things they can do is something called a members' inquiry, where we write in to the council on your behalf. The council then forward that onto the housing association. So we can ask questions. So we can't sort of, demand things. But if you word the question in the correct way, then you can get the right outcomes. We don't always get good answers. Sometimes we don't get answers at all, but that's certainly the first thing to try. The second thing is actually to go to the housing association's own website and find the complaints process and basically put a complaint in. It may not help on a short term, but the longer it continues, it may help in kind of the later stages. So always have a think about putting in an official complaint, because again, it's another way of escalating an issue within the organisation. There's something called the Housing Ombudsman. And it was actually a couple of years before I realised actually they're based in Tower Hamlets on the Isle of Dogs, but that's where they are. But you can't involve the Housing Ombudsman from day one. You can only involve them at the end of the complaints process with your housing association. And that's why sometimes it's important to start the complaints early. And the last one is sometimes you use Twitter. I mean, again, I'm assuming you have some technical knowledge, but maybe within your wider family or friends, maybe you're on Twitter, or you can get on Twitter, sort of direct these questions on Twitter at them, because Twitter is public and it's read by people like myself and Councillor Mir and Mayor John Biggs and all the rest of it. They don't like those kind of complaints being raised in public. So sometimes, not always, that also helps with issues as well. And then sometimes in the worst cases, sometimes it's worth talking to the local press as well and trying to get your issue into the newspapers. There have been a couple of tragic cases where people were so fed up, they went to the press, and actually that also helped as well. Maybe not the more routine stuff, but if things go badly wrong, that's something to keep in mind. And then, talk to other people. Sometimes also on social media, I see people put questions onto social media, onto Facebook or other things like that. And what they will then find is, for a classic example, somebody was saying, oh, the water was cut off. Why? And then somebody ran, then said, well, it's because Thames Water were digging out the street around the corner. So sometimes it's worth reaching out on social media as well to find out from other people if they've got solutions to these problems as well. And those are kind of the typical things that you should do if you're running into any kind of problem and not getting any result from your housing association or the council or whoever it might be. So that's my suggested top tips.
No, cool. No, thanks for that. And I think a lot of people do get confused. I know a lot of people contact their MP, the local MP, as the first point of call. I know I get used to and still get a lot of inquiries that are passed from the MP onto the local councillors. So a lot of people just don't know who is the point of contact for what issues. Local issues like services from the council or housing, that's your local councillor. Anything to do with central government, such as immigration, or say you've got a relative stuck abroad, which is the responsibility of the Foreign Office, that you direct them through the MP. And that's the same way as a councillor. An MP can raise questions, and through those questions something gets done. And what I found was that when we raise a question about an issue, what would happen is the housing association or the council would first remedy the situation and then basically give the answer saying, we are aware of it, this is what we've done. So actually the question from your councillor actually prompts the organization to actually prioritize or fast track the action, realizing that someone's onto it, and it just gives an impetus for the situation to be solved. But um, definitely, any issues, contact your local council. One of the things that I've come across is the health priority on housing, and there's been a lot of misunderstanding with regards to that I've come across over and over again. So one of the things is, if you're on the housing list, and if it's assessed that due to your health issues you need to be housed or prioritized in terms of housing, then the council has to prioritize the housing. So I'll just give an example. A basic example is, just imagine you need to use a wheelchair, and your current accommodation has no lift. You're at the like a top of a block. Um, the it is the council has to prioritize you in getting you suitable housing to enable you to like move around in a wheelchair, for example, and access your property without any detriment to your health. So that's just a basic example. So what I found time and time again is, people go to their GP or people go to the hospital and have a conversation with the doctor, and the doctor goes, this is not acceptable, you need to get housing, and they give a letter, and they assume that because of that they should be prioritized in terms of housing. And what they don't realize is that Tower Hamlets Council has its own criteria of what a health a criteria of who they should prioritize in terms of their health, which is totally different from your GP and totally different from your hospital. And whatever letters you have from your GP and hospital, they will not take it into account. What they would want is for you to fill in the form, you get a form, you fill it in, and then that is assessed. Initially, just looking at the paperwork, if that is rejected, you have the opportunity to appeal, and then the council officers will look at the appeal. If they assess you, the council will send their own team called an occupational therapy team to actually look at you, just assess your where you live. And if they believe that you should be prioritized on housing, you'll be prioritized. If they don't believe that you shouldn't be prioritized, and that's it. Regardless of what your GP or your doctor says. And time and time again, I've had like people come and go, no, this is outrageous, and just trying to explain that to them, that it's been hard going, and it's just something that I've come across time and time again. Have you come across this issue, Andrew?
In your case? It comes up a lot, and it's one of the questions I ask people who are on the housing waiting list, is that, have your health conditions changed? And if they've changed negatively, then it may be worth you sort of asking that question of the council as to whether you'd move up into a band. Because if you're going up the bands, it means that it could mean a dramatic reduction in how long you wait for a property. I'm not sort of saying cut it by 90%, but it could mean saving a couple of years. But then there are also lots of people who do have health issues, and probably more than there is space. So again, the council will have some mechanism for sorting this out. But I've dealt, particularly this last year, with mold. Mold seems to be a real problem this winter, even much so than previous years. And I guess that's also because it's been cold, and also because people have been cooped up at home because of lockdown has made it even worse. And obviously, mold has health implications. So I've dealt with a few families who've got health issues because of the mold. And one partial solution would be to move into a bigger property, because there are basically too many people in one property that's not well ventilated enough. But then the health issues may not be bad enough to justify that move, unfortunately. And it's a really difficult conversation to have with people, because the longer they stay in that property, the worse their health becomes.
Well, I've come across people bringing statutory nuisance cases against their social landlords for houses that are not fit, and chronic dampness is one of those issues, and always in all cases, the housing association settles before the actual hearing. So again, that is an avenue available for, and if you're on benefits, you will get legal aid. I think it's something else in the sense that the firm takes a percentage of your compensation or something like that. It's something from the law society, but it is an issue. But the other issue I've come across is the company that Tower Hamlets Council uses for the initial assessments always seems to reject applications, and it's not. There was newspaper articles done on the company that a lot of local authorities have used it. What it's found is that it's just a desktop. They're not actually looking through the applications, it seems. And I know it's been raising over scrutiny with Tower Hamlets Council about the use of this agency that they use for the assessments. I know Islington Council have stopped using that and have got their council officers now to basically look at these assessments. Have you come across that issue of using this company to do the assessments?
So I'm aware of it because it has been discussed at Overview and Scrutiny Committee. But to be fair to the council, this is a incredibly difficult situation because you have more people on the housing waiting list than you have properties coming up, and there's always going to be battles as long as that's the situation. And I think what's going to be very interesting is sort of what happens to the housing market in Tower Hamlets. We're talking about rent prices going up, but in the last couple of months they've been going down. So will private renting become more affordable if prices go down? There's more A and B properties come on the market. We just don't know that yet. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to that over the next year.
Well, that brings us to the Q&A session, question and answer session. But next week we're going to do a special on the budget, where Andrew and I go through the budget. It seems like there's been a rebellion. I've got a message. There's been a rebellion of councillors writing a letter. Apparently it's been published. It's supposed to be a secret letter, but it's all over social media, claiming the new popular rates, donning on the mantle of the popular rates councillors. But Andrew and I will go through, dissect the budget, and we'll give you a summary of what's been happening. Is the rebellion going to go forward? Are we going to see a revolution in the town hall, or is this our equivalent of the Boston Tea Party? Come tune in next week, and we'll go through the budget. But thanks again for watching, and enjoy the weekend, and look forward to seeing you again at the Weekly Politics Show every Friday, 7 to 8. Thank you very much. Thank you.